welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer from the Department of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I'll be the host of our program today. Joining me as usual is Don Cooney, who is a professor in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University and also a city commissioner. And we have two very special guests with us today. I'll start with Jessica Clark to my left here. And Jessica is the co-director of the Peace Center at Western Michigan University, which is housed in the Wesley Foundation. And they're going to build a new Wesley Foundation building, and the Peace Center is really encouraging people to contribute and raise money to help establish the Peace Center at the Wesley Foundation, the new center as well. Also, to Jessica's left is Mike DeWale, and Mike is a co-founder of Peace House here in Kalamazoo. Peace House is over on the east side of Kalamazoo and is involved in work with young people on the east side and other peace-related activities. So we'd like to welcome both of you to the program. And the topic today that we want to talk about are drones and drone strikes as an element of American foreign policy. And there are many people who are very concerned about this issue, including our two guests. And they are part of a larger effort to organize a walk that will take place from Chicago to Battle Creek. And it will be an effort to raise issues concerning the drones. There will be a vigil involved in all this as well. And trying to bring some attention to the fact that at Battle Creek, we are now going, at the Air National Guard base in Battle Creek, we are going to have a drone operator system, right, Mike?
That's correct.
So Mike, let's start with you to tell us a little bit about what's going to be happening at the Air National Guard base there in Battle Creek and why people are concerned about that.
Sure. Battle Creek, it was announced last year that Battle Creek's Air National Guard base would be receiving a remote piloting facility where pilots would sit in a room and pilot by remote control the drones that are flying all over the Middle East and Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, other places where unmanned vehicles are being used. Mm-hmm. It's one of many bases around the country. There are at least 64 other bases. This is one of the newest. So we're concerned about the direction that we're heading with drones. Drones are a new weapon. There are a lot of moral, ethical implications to the use of drones and unmanned vehicles to target individuals and destroy individuals with their weapons. The drones are being used increasingly as a substitute for so-called boots on the ground.
Right.
You know, they're a much more politically attractive option in some circles than invasion, right? So as they become used more and more prevalently, their use is expanded. We feel that it's important to raise attention about what's happening with drones, how drones are used, the ramifications of drone use, the effect that the use of drones has on civilian, innocent populations around the world. So we were approached, Peace House was approached some months ago by an organization in Chicago called Voices for Creative Nonviolence. And Voices has been around for many years, and they've taken trips to places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, other places where the United States has either put into effect sanctions, has put into effect drone warfare. Basically, they get connected with local populations, and they tell us, they bring back the stories, what it's like to live under these sort of situations, with drones in the sky, with sanctions in effect, with wars going on. And they bring back the stories of ordinary Yemenis, ordinary Afghanis, ordinary Pakistanis, so that we can know what the effect of our foreign policy is having on ordinary individuals.
And Kathy Kelly, who
Kathy
is one of
Kelly
the
is the
organizers, founder of that group, Voices for Creative Nonviolence, has been a guest on this program several times.
Great.
So
Yeah.
we're doing outstanding work. So we know Kathy. So.
Right. So they've been working on this issue for many years, and they've organized a lot of different actions, different walks similar to this one. When they learned that there would be a new base in Battle Creek, they felt that it was appropriate to bring their anti-drone campaign, their awareness-raising campaign, to our area. So what they proposed to us, and we agreed and helped to organize, is a walk from Boeing headquarters in Chicago, beginning on June 3rd of this year. Boeing is a manufacturer of drones, though not the specific drones that will be controlled from Battle Creek, but other drones.
Not the MQ-9 Reaper,
The
which is the
MQ-9
one,
Reaper.
which is
Correct.
the one that will be
Correct.
piloted from Battle Creek, right?
Correct. And so the walk will begin in Chicago, and basically will cover the 165 miles over the course of 12 days between that facility and the Air National Guard base in Battle Creek. Some people will walk the entire way, some people will walk part of the way, but in every place that the walkers travel, we will be doing what we can to raise awareness about the reality of drones, drone warfare, and the effect that they're having on people in our country, not just in other places, but in our country, around the world, and talk about the moral, ethical, spiritual questions that we need to deal with as Americans with these weapons that are being used in our name. So we'll travel from Chicago to Battle Creek. We'll arrive in Battle Creek on June 14th, where we will hold a vigil in the name of the victims of drones, the innocent victims of drones, the civilians who've been killed, other lives that have been affected, and we'll just do what we can to let people know about what's happening in their name, and provide an alternative vision for what we can do.
Sounds good.
So that's it.
Jessica, I know you've done some research on the impact that drones have on the ground, the kind of reporting that Kathy Kelly and Voices for Creative Nonviolence do. So you want to talk a little bit about that issue?
Yeah, definitely. I have a quote here from a survivor of a drone strike in Yemen, and I'll just read that to start out with. After the drone strike, villagers were left to identify 2 dead relatives from identity cards, scraps of clothing, and the license plate of Mr. Jamel's Toyota. The 7 bodies were shredded beyond recognition. As cell phone photos taken at the scene attest, we found eyes, but there were no faces left, said Abdullah Fakih, a student who knew both of the dead cousins. And so, when drones strike, a lot of times victims don't know what hit them. It just comes from the sky and can take out a whole community or village. People are afraid to go to funerals and festivities in places where there have been drone attacks, and so it has a long-lasting impact, causing PTSD. When people's homes are destroyed, they are left on their own to try to find a new place to live.
So what is the purpose of the drone strikes? What does the United States say that it's trying to do and accomplish through this particular military technology?
They say that they're targeting militants and terrorists. The CIA is responsible for deciding who is a target, and they keep that really secretive. I think as of July 2013, they announced that they would no longer disclose who was being targeted or why. And so, yeah, they say that they're going after terrorists, but I think on average 36 civilians are killed for every militant target that they are after.
And the definition of a terrorist or a militant is very elastic, isn't it? I mean, they really stretch this definition. Mike, you were earlier saying something about any male above the age of 13 or something like that?
Sure, and in accounting for who among the dead is a militant, the basic rule has been, and I don't know if it continues to be, but it was for at least a period of time, that any male between the ages of 20 and 40 may be classified as a militant That would be the only identifying characteristic of a militant. It's
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they were a male within that age range.
yeah.
So there's no way to say exactly how many actual militants have been killed by drone strikes.
Yeah, when they were challenged on that, the government, they said, well, we presume they are, but we check afterwards to see if they weren't, and if they weren't, then we will admit that and we will take. The problem is they never check afterwards, and how are you going to check afterwards, and there's no way.
So there's no behavioral indicators
No.
necessarily that these people are, quote, terrorists. Let's even presume that they have a legitimate right to kill terrorists, which they don't, but let's just assume that. But there's no behavioral characteristics that are identifying who is, in fact, a terrorist or a militant or some military threat, often, other than they're of a certain age. There's a gathering of people, which could be a funeral or a wedding ceremony. We've sort of notoriously bombed several different weddings in those areas. So that seems to be a very, to put it mildly, loosey-goosey kind of approach to a military operation.
And it points to some limitations of what is talked about as a very precise, technologically advanced system. The sensors on these drones, and these Reaper drones, are very sophisticated compared to consumer technology. I mean, they're the best that money can buy. However, they're still not good enough to identify with clarity who's doing what precisely. And a pilot needs to use some sort of intuition, some sort of guessing to decide what's something to be fired at and what's not. And there's also a very narrow window of time that a drone pilot gets to act on that impulse, because the drones are pretty much in constant orbit around different flight paths in areas where they're operating. We like to think of a drone as something that can be directed right towards an area, and it'll move right where it needs to go, and then it can fire. But
Surgical. It's surgical.
But the thing is that the thing is floating around. It's very susceptible to weather conditions. The cameras on it are not as precise as we would like to pretend that they are, and split-second decisions need to be made. And once that split-second decision is made, because of the time it takes from information to get from one end of the globe to the other, we're bounded by the speed of light in computers, it is 2 to 6 seconds before a trigger is pulled and an action is taken. A missile is fired or a bomb is dropped. So there's a lot of imprecision built into this supposedly very precise system.
I would like to just focus for a minute on the legal question here. There are certainly broader moral questions and political questions, but my expertise is in the law and international law in particular. So I want people to understand how international law does relate to drones. So the first thing is that if you're in, I'm going to sidestep the broader question of whether this is a legitimate conflict. Let's say you are in a legitimate conflict. There is a war that's going on between two nations. The actions are still governed in that case by international humanitarian law, which we call the laws of war. I mean, it may seem kind of funny to people that there are laws that govern warfare, but there are. And these are long-standing. They go all the way back to the 19th century to several Hague and Geneva Conventions. So there are laws that govern warfare. One of the hallmarks of international humanitarian law is that civilians and non-combatants are always to be given the highest priority for protection. Okay? So that means that you cannot deliberately target civilians or non-combatants. But not only that, you can't use military force that is, even if there's a legitimate military target, you cannot use military force that is disproportionate to achieving the military objective. And you can also not use military force in an indiscriminate manner. So, there might be some soldiers over there, let's just bomb the whole city, right? You can't use it in an indiscriminate way or use disproportionate force. And it seems to me that that's where the drones are illegal under international law, that these are war crimes because international humanitarian law says you cannot use disproportionate and indiscriminate military force. and you certainly can't target civilians. So I would say that these are illegal under international law. There's a second reason they're illegal under international law, and that is that international law also bans extrajudicial executions or assassinations or targeted killings. We're not allowed to say, oh, there's a political or military leader over there, let's go assassinate them. International law forbids that kind of extrajudicial execution. And at one point, the United States was very strong on upholding that element of international law. But the drones completely get us away from that. And the UN rapporteur who's been looking into the drone warfare keeps coming back to this point time and time again. The United States is in violation, or seems to be in violation, of this prohibition against extrajudicial executions. Now, there's one other point, which is maybe the most important point of all, in my mind, with regard to the legality here, and that is we have to go back to the United Nations Charter. The UN Charter, Article 2, Section 4, says that military force is prohibited from being used by nations in their international relations. There are two narrow exceptions, neither of which are covered here. One is if you're under attack, you're allowed to act in self-defense. You can use military force in self-defense. The second thing is that if the United Nations Security Council gives approval.
Right.
Okay? Clearly, the United Nations Security Council has not given approval for the invasion of Afghanistan, as it did not give for the invasion of Iraq. And it certainly has not given any approval to operations in Pakistan or in Yemen. And this is not self-defense. I mean, you can't claim, you know, how many years after 9/11 that this is all in self-defense from 9/11. That's a ridiculous idea on the face of it. The United Nations Charter prohibits the use of military force. And so fundamentally, this is not a legitimate conflict to begin with. This is an illegal military action to begin with. On top of that, we are now using illegal techniques or forms of warfare within the context of an illegal campaign. So I just wanted to get that out.
That's powerful. That is really powerful. Ron, what about, suppose, with regard to international law, if they knew that there was a guy who was clearly a terrorist, but they knew that in order to kill that guy, they had to kill a bunch of other people around them, isn't there some kind of a prescription about collateral damage, that you can't go after a single person if you know you want to kill 32 other people that are innocent?
Well, that's a little bit murky.
Is it?
Because, you know, the notion of what is disproportionate use of force, right? Or an indiscriminate use of force.
Right.
These are also, unfortunately, under international law, these are very elastic kinds of terms. The biggest problem with international law is the elasticity of the notion of military necessity. Okay? So a lot of things that have happened with regard to aerial warfare have been excused by that notion of military necessity. So you can use force if it's a military necessity, but they stretch the notion of military necessity to cover a whole number of different circumstances. And this goes all the way back to World War II. It's not a new thing. But so it ends up being somewhat murky just because of that particular element. But again, to me, the notion that these are legitimate targets in the first place is what needs to be challenged, right?
Yeah, that's very important.
And to some extent, who are the militants? They're people who are resisting the invasion of their country, right? If you resist the invasion of your country, you become a terrorist or a militant, and now are targeted for assassination by this particular kind of campaign. So again, to me, I have to go back to, is this a legitimate legal conflict to begin with? And it's not, in my mind, that the invasion of Afghanistan was illegal, and its extension over into Pakistan and the warfare there is therefore also illegal. And if people are resisting an invasion in their home country, they cannot be labeled or characterized as militants or terrorists and then be targeted for execution. That seems to me to be the clear basis for the law here.
Wow, yeah. And I guess one of the things that comes out already is the difference between the marketing and the actuality of what is happening with this drone warfare. Did you say that there's 38 for every person?
36 from, I believe, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. is what they've done a lot of extensive research on who's targeted by drones and the collateral damage or the civilians who die, and that's approximately the number that they've come up with.
And this idea about the illegality of the whole thing, that is not at all debated in the mainstream media. Not at all.
No, it's completely ignored.
Yeah.
As if the United States, I mean, even when we do talk about international law, there's always this double standard, right? So
Yes,
the U.S.
American-
can blatantly violate international law by invading Iraq and invading Afghanistan, and then Putin does something in the Crimea, and all of a sudden we're all concerned about international law and violations of international law, and the hypocrisy is pretty rank.
American exceptionalism.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and let me turn back to Jessica, because I know that's an issue that you have been concerned about and wanted to talk a little bit about. U.S. exceptionalism. What does that mean, and what are the effects of that concept?
United States exceptionalism is the idea that the United States is superior or above other countries, and so while that example with Russia and Crimea is quite relevant, we're having these illegal covert drone warfare going on, and we're totally justified in it. And when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan looking for weapons of mass destruction, we were still fueling the nuclear missiles that we were holding and the weapons of mass destruction that we have. And so I think that this ideology is used to justify a lot of problematic things that are done in our name.
Because we're the good people and these other people are evil, so we have the right. These laws apply to them, not to us, because we're on the right side.
Yeah, I think things get drawn in those kind of stark terms, American, and there's not a lot of discussion or debate among the American population about this either. I don't
Really?
think
Not at
Americans
all.
really understand the nature of the hypocrisy of our foreign policy, that international law is good for you, but we don't have to follow it because we're the good guys and we're trying to do good things. And I think a lot of Americans would say, well, yeah, we're the good guys. We're trying to do good things. We're responding to terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. Therefore, we need to do what we need to do, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And we're defending freedom around the world, and freedom isn't free, and therefore we have the right to do these things because we have good intentions, right?
Yeah.
Because we have good intentions, that justifies whatever means we choose to use in this battle. And of course, the means are often illegal means, as the drones are an illegal technique under international law, as far as I can see. But we feel justified in using it because of the intentions are supposedly good, right?
Right, and that's why what you're doing is so important. I mean, to challenge the right of the United States to do these things, and to make the American people face, here is the reality of what this drone warfare means.
Sure. And I think another really important thing that we need to do is put ourselves in the place of the folks who are living under the reality of drones and these strikes. There was some testimony, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but it showed up in a report that Stanford University did on drone warfare in 2012, I believe. It's Googleable. Look it up. But there was a testimony from a young Afghani boy, I believe, 13 years old, who talked about life under drones. And he said, we always pray for a cloudy day, because on the blue skies, that's when the drones will fly. Right? And just imagining that, I mean, maybe these drones aren't being used specifically to terrorize a population, but it's what they do. When children live with the reality that these things flying overhead could incinerate them at a moment's notice, it's a terrifying thing to live under.
Right.
And if we imagine, well, what if our children were living under those conditions? What if our children couldn't play outside because some remote control airplane all the way up there might drop a Hellfire missile on them and incinerate the block? We need to feel safe. I understand we need to feel safe in our country, and we want our children to feel safe, and we want to feel our loved ones safe. But I think we need to include in our circle of loved ones these people far away in Afghanistan, and these children in Yemen, and these babies in Pakistan, and grandmothers in Somalia, or wherever where these drones are being used, and say, you know what, they deserve to feel safe too. They deserve to feel secure in their homes. And they deserve not to have death rain down on them by remote control from these American planes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's so important. And then the follow-up to that also is that it's counterproductive because, Jess, I'm sure that you've seen that in what your research about. What happens to the people when innocent people are killed? What do they think about the United States after that?
Yeah, I've read that drone warfare actually facilitates and fosters hate and creates more terrorism by just creating, hatred and resentment and anger and alienation towards the United States, this country that has these aircrafts hovering above them, watching them, surveilling them constantly, and then shooting them or people that they know. And so I think that it's not unreasonable for someone who has PTSD from this sort of attack to be really angry at the perpetrator of this attack, which is the United States. And so I think instead of having drone warfare, like a faceless missile or bomb raining down from the sky, if we could have like real conversations with these people and try to resolve the conflicts, if there is any, between the United States and them, I think that through like restorative justice and like real listening, we could resolve the problems. It would take a lot more emotional energy and time, but I think it would probably be cheaper in terms of human lives and dollars spent.
Yeah, to me that's always been sort of this huge paradox of any kind of military operation that's supposed to be going after terrorists, right? So, and Donald Rumsfeld, when he was still the Secretary of Defense, actually raised this issue himself in a memo.
Oh, really?
I don't think he ever really reflected on it, but he was basically saying, well, what's the metrics here in terms of, you know, if we kill somebody, does that generate even more insurgents, right? Does that create even more resistors to our efforts in Iraq? He was doing this particularly with regard to Iraq. And I don't think he ever really openly and honestly faced up to his own question. And I don't think that as a government we have faced up to this question that, okay, let's say we really wanted to get after the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. First of all, there's no reflection on why people were motivated to do that in the first place.
Exactly.
What were the underlying conditions that led to that? Can't go there. We just have to assume they're evil people, they're bad people, and out of a clear blue sky they decided to attack us, right, because they're evil. So so you can't go into the examining the motives, right? But let's say, okay, you're responding to a terrorist attack and you're going after people who are in fact bad guys. And in doing that now, you go after them and you do it in such a way as to kill innocent civilians and you create more resentment and anger on the ground. How many more of the militants and terrorists are you creating?
Yeah.
So it seems to me that, you know, why don't we just step back and think, okay, we really want to go after terrorists, but by doing it in this particular way, we're creating even more terrorists.
Right.
We're making ourselves less safe. So why continue to do this? Why continue to pursue this particular angle, this avenue, when, of course, there are other avenues? You mentioned various forms of diplomacy and other kinds of international relationships that we could develop that would be perhaps far better as a way of getting at the underlying conditions that foster these kinds of conflicts. And yet our idea is that, well, you know, it's sort of like the notion of, you know, you give a small child a hammer and they find that everything needs to be pounded on, right?
Right, right.
We have this marvelous military machine and we have this tremendous military technology, and so every problem has to be solvable by that particular hammer. And we can't even consider any other tools. We don't even have any other tools in our toolbox sometimes, let alone considering developing, investing some money and talent into developing any alternative ways of responding. So.
And I think that's going to become more acute as climate change comes along and we have more scarcity of basic resources like water and food and energy kinds of things. And more and more people we're going to want all we have. Oh, we deserve it all. Mm-hmm. But to get that, we have to take it from other people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it seems like, Mike, you started to talk about that before. What are the alternatives here? What are the alternatives than just taking the hammer of military force and what else can we do to make the world a safer place, to make us a safer nation?
Well, I think Jessica's ideas were fantastic ones. I mean, we need to develop our technology in restorative justice.
Yeah.
We need to develop our nonviolence. We need to develop our ways of connecting with each other, right? And we need to do more to magnify the goods that we have, the things in the world that we want to share. You know, our energy, our food, our water. Make more of that available to more people, right? Spend our time and energy doing that instead of building our bristling wall of guns and missiles around the things that are already there, right? We need to employ our creativity for something else besides blowing stuff up, which we're very good at.
Yes,
right?
we are.
We excel at it. We can do it better than anyone ever, right? But what good is it to be good at that?
You know, it's interesting to me. What you're talking about is exactly right. And I think back to the history of after the Second World War, when developing countries went to the United Nations and advocated for a new international economic order, which is what you're talking about, a sharing kind of thing. They're saying, look, what we need is, we don't want you to take care of us for the rest of our life. But we want you to give us the technology to help us get the education and help us to get the resources that will allow us to get started, and then we'll be on our own, and we'll have a new international economic order is very threatening to people who are already on top.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the word here that needs to be brought into play that people in the U.S. government always want to avoid is empire.
Exactly.
Right.
That's what we are. We're an empire, and we act in imperial ways in the world. Why? To defend the economic interest of major corporations and the wealthy, and to maintain certain geopolitical interests that the United States has in the international arena as we dance around with other countries. And so for those economic and geopolitical interests, we pursue military domination. That's why we have this huge military. It's not to defend the United States.
No.
It's not for the legitimate defense needs. It's for projecting power. It's for being able to influence the other actors in the world and to maintain the economic interests of U.S. corporations and the geopolitical interests of our government. And we're not willing to face up to that. So that's why we use all the euphemisms, and we have to talk about it. You know, that's why all this American exceptionalism talk, and that's why whenever we take a military action, it always has to be couched in completely different language, because we can't really talk about the real reasons, the real motives for why we're engaged in these actions. And what happens then is that we end up with, one of the concepts I've been working with in my own academic work is cultures of denial.
Yes.
That what happens is that, and again, I have some colleagues in criminology who have worked very hard to develop this, and this goes back to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, when it was discovered by one of my colleagues that within NASA there had developed a kind of normalization of deviant actions, that certain things had happened that were deviant, but it happened slowly and gradually, and they had sort of normalized these
Became
things.
acceptable.
And it became acceptable within the organization, and I think that's sort of what's happened with regard to our military policy, not just within our military organizations, but within our broader political culture.
That's right.
That these things have become normalized, acceptable, because of the particular way in which we deny the reality of our actions, and we try to develop another cover story for why the U.S. has to do what it does, and that becomes accepted, and then the use of the military hammer becomes completely normalized within our political culture.
Yeah. So the issue is then, how do we counter that? How do we challenge that? And the march is one way to do that. It's one way to do that. And we need a lot more of that to kind of, I mean, there's people writing on this. Well, Chalmers Johnson, before he died, was writing on that wonderfully.
Dismantling the empire.
Yes, that's Andrew Bacevich, I think, is writing on that now. But these people don't get the attention or the access to the media that they need. So But it's getting harder and harder to do the challenging. You're a witness to that. When you do the challenging, you pay a high price for that, and it's more difficult. It's just very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
One of the problems, I think, with regard to the normalization of military responses is World War II, because it was the good war.
Yeah.
And because there was such an obvious evil that was being confronted with Hitler and the Nazis and with the Japanese Empire. So, the U.S. was responding, in a sense, to some real threats. And so, again, as Studs Terkel put it, the good war. But Studs always put that in quotation marks, right?
Yeah.
But the perception was that this was a good war, and therefore, again, we come back to this notion that if you have good intentions, if you're fighting evil, then perhaps any means necessary to do it are acceptable. And so what we see during World War II is the increasing use of aerial bombardment of civilian populations.
Right.
This was done by the British, and then the U.S. joined in. The U.S. was hesitant to start attacking civilian populations at first, but then they joined in as well. And so you have Dresden, and then you have the firebombing of Tokyo, and then, of course, the ultimate is the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
But these things, again, all become normalized because it was the good war. We were fighting an evil that needed to be fought, and therefore, again, any means necessary to do it. And then once those things become normalized, though, they carry over. We see that in Korea. We see it in Vietnam. Huge, massive amounts of aerial bombardment in those wars. How did we start off the invasion of Iraq? It was what? Remember? What was the concept? Shock and awe.
Shock and awe, and that though sort of last about a week, and well, only it didn't.
Yeah.
And I guess getting back to the what we started talking about in the beginning, I mean the difference between the way these things are marketed and what actually happens here, and the American people are not confronted with that. They don't. They think, well, we have to get these terrorists, but they don't look at the consequences of that. I think that, and that's the way they justify it, is by saying we have to protect our people. Look at 9/11. But as you said, Ron, 9/11 happened a long time ago, and none of these people were there, so it wasn't that. Yeah.
I guess another thing that I wanted to touch on was the surveillance that drones ensure in terms of nationally within the U.S. borders. And I heard that 10 of the 50 new jobs that will be created at the Battle Creek Air Base will be allotted to drone operators looking into civilian uprisings and crowd control. And I think that this is potentially dangerous in terms of organizing for a better world, We've already got the NSA over our shoulders whenever we're on the internet, all of us. And so I think that the panopticon that's creating is really dangerous to our democracy. And I thought that I might read a quote from Spying on Democracy from City Lights books. Michel Foucault wrote that modern control over society might be accomplished by watching its members and maintaining routine information about them. Foucault emphasized that Jeremy Bentham's 18th century panopticon, a continuous surveillance model for prisoners who could not tell if they were being watched, exemplified an institution capable of producing what he called docile bodies. And I think that this is relevant in terms of our work trying to make the world safer and less terroristic, to hold the United States accountable for its violations of international law. If we're being spied on constantly, if all people are being watched through the NSA, I think that this is a relevant thing to consider, because
the drones will come home.
Yes.
And they'll watch us.
Right.
Maybe they won't be bombing us, but they'll be watching us.
They will be watching us, and they want to act on it. Recently, I'm teaching this class now on social change, and what we were looking at was between the end of the Second World War and the mid-1970s, we all grew together in this country. Economically, the middle class widened, poverty decreased. But then something happened in the 70s which changed this around. And one of the key things was the Powell memo. In 1971, which was written by the guy who later became a Chief Justice. But the thing that struck me as I read the Powell memo was the language he used about people who were challenging the existing economic system. I mean, he used terms like completely trying to overturn our basic system. In other words, terrorists. These were terrorists. I don't think it's a big jump from people who want to defend this system as it is to calling people who challenge the system terrorists and trying to over it. And the consequences of that are just tremendous. And I think we're moving in that direction. And the new techniques, the drones, would enable it much easier to do surveillance and so easy for them to manipulate the information and the intelligence that they gather to frame it in a way that would turn the American people against people that challenge what's going on. That's very scary to me.
All the more reason why a walk and vigil like this is so important, because it's confronting some of those issues head on. So, Mike, do you have in the plan so far what kinds of activities you want to do when you get, because you're going to be stopping off at different points along the route from Chicago to Battle Creek, like you're going to be in Kalamazoo on Thursday, June 12th.
Correct.
So what kinds of things do you want to do, and what kinds of activities to help, because you're trying to communicate a message here as well with the walk. So have you done some thinking about how that's going to work?
Well, we're trying to arrange a speaking event in every town that we walk through. Or walk to, maybe. In Kalamazoo, I'm sorry I don't have all the details for it right now, but there will be a potluck and a speaking event at St. Thomas More Student Parish on Thursday the 12th. And I think there will be more that will be ready announced as more of the planning comes together. But there'll be that, and of course, everyone is welcome to join us at the vigil on the 14th at the Air National Guard base. We're still trying to figure out, exactly where we'll be able to hold that vigil. Our hope is that it will be at the base itself, at the gates of the base. If that's possible, that's what we'll do. But we will keep everybody informed as to where that vigil will take place and the activities of that day, the climactic day of the walk. I would encourage anybody to contact us who's interested in this issue or participating in this event. You can contact us at Peace House, and I think our email and phone number will come up. You can contact folks at Nonviolent Opponents of War and get more information through their website. I think Kalamazoo Peace Center is an available resource too. If you know folks there and you want to figure out more of how you can participate, certainly call them up. And I would also direct folks to look at the Voices for Creative Nonviolence website that has a lot of information mainly about the campaigns that they've carried out in the name of bringing attention to drone warfare and wrestling with these issues. But they also have some information available on their website about the nature of drone warfare, which is a little bit harder to find. But if you look through their website, you'll find it. And a lot of the good analysis that they have.
And throughout the walk, I think another thing that's really important is just having one-on-one conversations with people that we meet. And
exactly.
So I think that'll be a big focus of the walk, is just talking to people, hearing where they're at, and sharing the moral and ethical implications that drone warfare has for the United States and what is being done in our names and what that means for the international community and U.S. exceptionalism and international law and that sort of thing. So I'm hopeful that the walk will bring about a lot of good conversations. And
yeah, I think that can be just as important as a big speaking event, those individual conversations, because it's hard to reach a lot of people through those other things. I mean, you get the people that already have some knowledge of the issue, perhaps, and who already are convinced that this is an important issue to address. but to try to reach people who may not have a lot of information about drones or may still be trying to make up their mind about whether this is a good thing or not, often it's the one-on-one individual conversations that can perhaps be more important.
And for certain, I mean, this will be a nonviolent, loving, peaceful presence, following this path and reaching our end destination and vigiling there. The group of people who will be making this journey will all be taking a pledge of nonviolence, taking a pledge to do their best to educate lovingly about the issues that we care about. So, I mean, it's a group that you may want to be a part of. You may want to walk with us for a few miles, or you might want to walk with us for a day or two. Those opportunities will be there. Or you may just want to come see us when we come to your town and hear more about what we've got going on.
Are you going to be providing transportation for people out to where the walk is at a particular point? If they wanted, let's say they're in Pawpaw, right? I think Pawpaw is going to be one of the stopping off points. Yep. So let's say people in Kalamazoo wanted to. Is there going to be transportation out to Pawpaw so they can then march into Kalamazoo?
We will organize that as we need to and as we're able to. Okay. So if somebody is interested in joining the walk at a particular point on a particular day, they should get in touch with Peace House or KNOW or Peace Center, and we will find a way to make that happen.
All right, that sounds good. Now, Jessica, I know that the Peace Center had some performance art, some street theater kind of, you have a skit that you do that deals with drones. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's still a work in progress, but in the spring we created a play about drone warfare, and there's a general of the CIA who's commanding his drone warfare fleet, and then a wizard of solidarity comes on stilts and questions whether or not Al-Qaeda is a unified group anymore, if it's just an ideology, and also the wizard speaks in verse and talks about how killing people from the sky is not a good way to solve problems, and then the wizard commands and brings about this nonviolent resistance to drones, and through cunning intellect and diplomacy, they overthrow the CIA general as well as his evil drones.
That sounds great.
And
so
we'll be performing that throughout the summer, probably outside of Art Hop and places like that.
Okay, you've already performed it a couple of times?
We performed it once at Hullabazoo.
Okay, and you're hoping to do it again a few more times this summer?
Yeah.
So you're thinking about doing it at Art Hop? Is that?
Yeah, outside.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Now, there's been a number of groups around the country that have been organizing around this issue. I know one of them is Code Pink and Medea Benjamin. Have you guys been in touch with any of them, or do you know?
Not directly, no.
Not directly.
I mean, we're aware of their work, and we're really grateful for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And speaking of Medea Benjamin,
You got it.
another important resource, if people want to get more information about drones, do you have a...
I do. I got a copy right
we
here.
can get it on camera here, maybe can zoom in on it. I don't know if we'll be able to get a good shot of it or not, but Medea Benjamin's book, and it's now in a second edition on drone warfare.
Yeah.
And Medea Benjamin, if people don't know about her, organized a group called Code Pink, and she also has been traveling, like Kathy Kelly, to different places around the world, the hot spots, the conflicts, and so she's always on the scene reporting, and has been very vocal in Washington too. She's not shy about disrupting a congressional hearing or showing up where she's not wanted and unfurling a banner or protesting. And so her book, I don't think we've been able to get it on the screen for you, but it's really an outstanding. So it's titled Drone Warfare, Killing by Remote Control, and again Medea Benjamin, and it's a revised and updated edition of the first one that came out on that topic.
I heard something, I don't know if anybody has heard anything about this, about cases of PTSD from people that operate the drones remotely. Have you heard anything about that at all?
Sure, the rates of PTSD for drone pilots are awfully high, and I couldn't tell you the rate. But, I mean, it's not too difficult to imagine. Somebody who goes to work every day, they get in their car, they leave their family in the morning, They drive to base or wherever, maybe they're already on base. They go to the place where they pilot. They sit in a chair for, maybe a 12-hour shift. Maybe drop a few bombs on some people during that day, and then they have to go home and return to a normal life, right? The disconnect between those two things is immense. You're living at home, you're punching your clock at work. Some people have died at the end of it, and then you go home. The rates are awfully high, and I know that. I wish I had statistics on it, but I don't.
Yeah,
But the thing is, like the distance that drones provide doesn't really save the human psyche from the trauma of killing somebody. Right?
I think of Howard Zinn in the Second World War,
Yeah.
who was a bombardier and dropped him, but then afterwards began to reflect on what's down at the bottom. And that quote that you had in the
my
beginning
paper
of
from
that,
Charles Lindbergh.
from Charles Lindbergh, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll just read that
I
briefly.
think you
that
should.
Charles Lindbergh, who people know was the famous pilot who made the transatlantic flight, but then he participated in World War II as a bomber pilot. A lot of people don't know that. But at one point, Lindbergh, after the war, wrote, "You press a button and death flies down. 1 second, the bomb hanging harmlessly in your racks, completely under your control. The next, it is hurtling down through the air, and nothing in your power can revoke what you have done. How can there be writhing, mangled bodies? How can this air around you be filled with unseen projectiles? It is like listening to a radio account of battle on the other side of the earth. It is too far away, too separated to hold reality." That's very interesting. I also remember one of my favorite episodes of the old television series, MASH.
Yeah.
And there was a young pilot, and he was shot down and injured, and he limped into the 4077 where Hawkeye Pierce and the gang were operating. And this kid comes in, and he's talking about what a great war it is. He gets up in the morning and has breakfast at the base, and then gets in his plane and goes drops some bombs on people, goes back to the base, has dinner. Again, that sort of, but he's not making the connection at all. And Hawkeye Pierce is just appalled by this. So Hawkeye maneuvers to get this kid into the operating room, and Colonel Potter is operating on a young girl who's been hit by a bomb. And the young pilot is just horrified, and he just, whose bomb did that? Was it our bomb or their bomb? And Colonel Potter says, it doesn't matter. And so the kid runs out of the room, and he's so, he's aghast, and Hawkeye Pierce follows him out, and he turns on Hawkeye and accuses him of maneuvering him in there. And Hawkeye says, "Yeah, I did. You seem like too nice a kid to be separating the consequences here, right?"
Wow.
And sometimes when we are separated from the consequences of our actions, we can easily evade
That's
the
right.
moral responsibility. But it still comes back in other ways, I think, to affect people. If you have any kind of a conscience, I think it begins to have that effect on you. So. Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, Mike, so I just want you to go back over the details of the walk and the vigil, make sure people have it straight, what's going to happen and where it's going to happen and how they can get involved.
Sure. The walk will start in Chicago on June 3rd at the Boeing headquarters, and will continue mostly along Route 12 and the Red Arrow Highway, through Kalamazoo, through Galesburg, and to Battle Creek. I don't have the entire schedule in front of me, but it'll arrive in Kalamazoo on the 12th.
On the 12th.
We'll be in Galesburg on the 13th, and we'll make our final walk to the Air National Guard base on the 14th, where we'll have our vigil. People are welcome to join us for any portion of the walk. It'd be great if they contact us first so that we can support them. We're also looking for support for people to provide meals and other hospitality to the walkers in various places along the route. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, that kind of thing. And if they want to get involved, they can contact us at Peace House, of course, or contact KNOW, or contact the Peace Center. And we will be happy to find a way to plug you into what is going to be, I think, a really powerful, really meaningful event.
Great.
One way to try to negate the normalization of these kinds of activities in our society. So, well, I think it sounds great. Really an important march or walk and vigil at Battle Creek. And then on Saturday the 14th, there'll be this vigil. We don't know exactly where it's going to be yet, but and there's going to be music and speakers, and maybe the Peace Center will be performing its little skit, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe it might be a place to do it. So, okay. Well, we want to thank you
Yes.
for both being here.
Thank you,
Mike
Ron.
Thanks for
DeWale
having me.
Thank you
from
so much.
Peace House here in Kalamazoo, Jessica Clark from the Peace Center, co-director there at WMU at the Wesley Foundation. And again, if people want to get involved in the march, the walk, I keep saying march, the walk and the vigil, I think we've put up the website on the screen a couple of different times.
Great.
And
That's great.
Don,
Yeah.
any final words?
No, just thank you for what you're doing. It's an important witness, and I'm so glad that you're going through our city, and we'll do everything we can to get people there, especially for the night event at St. Tom's.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Sounds
Thanks.
great. All right. We'd like to invite you to join us again on Critical Issues, Alternative Views. We try to address the most important issues of the day and try to provide some analysis that maybe you don't get someplace else, certainly not in the mainstream media. So please join us again for another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views.